Shanghai, 1936. A city of smoke and silk, of secrets traded in back rooms and danger that slips through cracks like steam from the harbor. For Catherine Bell, the journey began with a memory, a photograph, and a question that refused to stay buried. But in Shanghai, answers are never free. This is part 1 of Beneath the Jade Sea. Chapter 1. Arrival at the Docks. Shanghai, 1936. Rain slicks the cobblestones and steam coils in the air, carrying the scent of brine, oil, and jasmine. The ship's horn bellowed through the mist as the gangplank lowered with a moan. Catherine Bell stepped off the steamer with her collar turned up against the wind, her boots clicking sharply on the wet stone. Behind her, the SS Mariposa exhaled smoke and iron groans as the engine wound down. Ahead, Shanghai unfolded like a dream built on secrets, a dream on the edge of waking. Rickshaws veered past porters shouting in a half-dozen languages. Neon signs blinked Mandarin characters over Western advertisements for cigarettes and cinema. British constables barked orders at Chinese dockworkers. The harbor swelled with ships, Japanese freighters, rusted Dutch merchant vessels, even a gleaming white yacht that looked wildly out of place. Catherine paused at the edge of the throng, a woman in a crisp khaki shirt and linen blouse. She looked like any other diplomat's assistant or eccentric researcher, but beneath her coat, nestled beside her passport and maps, was the real reason she'd come. A dog-eared photograph of her father, and a lacquered envelope bearing the symbol of a coiled jade dragon. She adjusted the leather satchel over her shoulder and pushed forward. A rickshaw driver hissed through his teeth as he pulled alongside her. "Missy need ride? Big hotel?" Catherine gave a tight smile. "No hotel. Just directions." He frowned slightly at her accent. American, polished but with sharp corners. Still, he pointed inland. "French concession? British consulate? Long way. Too far to walk. I'm not going there, either." That seemed to puzzle him, but she was already moving again, slipping between crates and barrels toward a side gate, away from the chaos. She walked with purpose, but her pulse betrayed her. She was being watched. Not by the rickshaw driver, or the sailors hollering over card games on crates, but someone else. That unmistakable prickle at the nape of her neck. The sensation her father had once called the whisper before the bullet. She didn't look back. Not yet. 15 minutes later, she ducked into a cramped tea shop tucked behind a tailor's stall. Inside, steam and clove-scented warmth cloaked the air. The din of the docks fell away. A boy brought her a cup without asking. Catherine took it without comment. The shop owner gave a nod. It was the first of several safe stops her father had outlined years ago in a battered leather journal that now never left her satchel. He had written them in code: tea leaves, porcelain, red lantern. Only once she arrived in Shanghai had the references taken shape. A trail meant not for authorities or colleagues, but for someone who shared his blood and his obsession with the truth. Catherine took out the journal now, letting her fingers brush the edges of the worn pages. The ink had faded in places, but her father's voice came through clearly in his sharp, deliberate hand. Notations were made like field entries, brief, technical, with flashes of sentiment buried deep. "If you're reading this, Cat, I've either made it out or I haven't. Either way, I trust you to finish what I started. You always had more fire than I did." A pang settled behind her ribs. He had written that line after the last entry, the one with the sketch of the jade dragon. There had been no conclusion, no farewell, just silence. She turned to the back pages where he'd scrawled names, some crossed out, others underlined. Likely contacts or informants from his time working with the American expeditionary groups in the region. One stood out. Li Zhong. Written in cleaner ink than the others, with an address and the character for trust. Catherine had reached out weeks before her departure, sending a coded telegram through a university contact. She hadn't expected a reply, but Lee had answered, briefly. A single sentence. "The dragon sleeps in the garden. Come before dusk." She didn't know what Lee looked like. She didn't know if he would even show. But she knew her father had trusted him, and that was enough. For now. She took the photograph from her satchel and studied it again. The image was faded, but unmistakable. Her father, Thomas Bell, in a straw hat, beside a Chinese scholar she couldn't identify. Behind them, a carved dragon curling up the side of a ceremonial pillar, the jade scales shimmering even in monochrome. On the back, in her father's elegant hand, Ningbo Temple, March 1910, the sea swallows all secrets. He'd vanished 3 months after the photograph was taken. Officially, a fever took him, but her mother had never believed it, and neither did Catherine. She took the photo away and drew out the envelope. Inside, a thin silk map faded with time. The dragon emblem repeated in the corner, alongside a set of numbers, coordinates perhaps. A single red brushstroke marked a point just south of Hangzhou. She was close. She could feel it. She downed the rest of the tea, pushed the cup aside, and stood. Time to find her contact. The man named Lee was supposed to meet her that night at the consulate gardens. A low-profile handoff. One more piece of the puzzle before the real search began. She stepped outside and nearly collided with a man leaning against the doorway. Tall, lean, jacket open, cufflinks but no tie. He looked as if he belonged at a gentleman's club or a poker game in the French concession, not skulking near a tea house. He didn't move. "Problem?" she asked. He smiled. "You look like someone on a mission. I find that fascinating. Find something else." He held up both hands, amused. "You're far from home, Miss Bell." Her stomach sank. She hadn't used that name yet, not in public. She didn't flinch. "And you are?" "Someone who just saved you 10 minutes of being followed." He nodded toward the end of the alley where a man in a gray cap paused, pretending to examine a lantern vendor's wares. Catherine's pulse quickened. "I didn't ask for help," she said. He stepped aside. "Suit yourself." She didn't thank him, didn't look back, but she felt his eyes follow her all the way to the next turn. And somehow, she knew it wouldn't be the last time. Chapter 2. The Auction House Encounter. Shanghai International Settlement. Later that evening. The doorman barely glanced at Catherine's forged invitation before ushering her through a pair of lacquered double doors. Inside the auction house was a cathedral of vice wrapped in velvet, soft jazz curling through the air, low voices murmuring in English, French, Mandarin, and Russian. A wall of mirrors reflected back tailored tuxedos, sequin dresses, and eyes far too interested in what everyone else was hiding. Catherine moved through the crowd with practiced ease, every detail filed and noted, the weight of diamonds around necks, the bulges of holstered pistols poorly disguised beneath silk sashes, the subtle language of who stood with whom and why. This wasn't a museum auction. It was a feeding frenzy with champagne. She found a space along the edge of the gallery and raised the black paddle she'd been issued, the number 38 stamped in gold. On the dais, a British auctioneer tapped his gavel and offered a theatrical smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, if I may. Our next piece is of rare and exquisite provenance, a Qing dynasty scroll believed to be over 250 years old, recently recovered from a private estate in Suzhou." A velvet-draped attendant unfurled the scroll, long ink painting of a storm-lashed coastline with a curled dragon skimming the water's edge. At the bottom corner, barely visible, was the same symbol Catherine had seen in her father's journal. Her breath caught. This was it. Opening bid 1,000 won, the auctioneer intoned. Before she could raise her paddle, a voice behind her drawled, "Let's not be shy, shall we? 5,000. Heads turned. Catherine didn't need to look. The voice was unmistakable. Cool, amused, a touch too smooth. She turned slowly, and there he was, the man from the tea house doorway, the one who'd warned her she was being followed. Not him again. She hadn't expected to see him here, and certainly not bidding on a Qing dynasty relics like an idol collector. Whatever he was, he clearly had access, an interest. That unsettled her more than she cared to admit. He stepped into view beside her, adjusting the cuffs of his jacket as if he hadn't just blown up the auction. His tie was still absent, shirt collar open just enough to suggest he'd either come from something dangerous or was about to. Catherine raised her paddle. 6. 7, Dane replied smoothly without turning his head. She cast him a withering glance. What exactly do you think you're buying? Wouldn't be half as much fun if I told you. 10,000, she said sharply. The room shifted. Bidders began to murmur. Dane only smiled. 15. The auctioneer looked delighted. Ah, a proper contest. Do I hear? But Catherine lowered her paddle, not because she was beaten, but because she knew the game. She wasn't here to win a trophy. She was here to follow the trail. The gavel came down with a clean snap. Sold to the gentleman in the front. She turned to him, calm but with steel behind her voice. You just wasted a great deal of money. Dane handed the paddle to an attendant and pocketed the receipt. I've wasted more on less. That voice again. Smooth, confident, and now undeniably familiar. Catherine's eyes narrowed, twice in one day. First at the tea house, now here. It couldn't be anything more than coincidence, could it? She smiled tightly, masking the churn in her gut. Coincidence or not, she didn't like surprises, and she liked him even less. She stepped closer. You don't even know what's on it. And you do? I know it ties to a set of coordinates in the southern provinces, she said, watching his reaction. I know it features the same dragon motif found in Ningbo. She stepped closer. And I know you didn't just stumble in here tonight for the wine and wallpaper. He smiled, unconcerned. Maybe I just have good taste. He leaned in just slightly, the glint of amusement never leaving his eyes. Well now, if it's that important to you, I might be persuaded to part with it. For how much? A drink. She stared at him. Pass. Another time. He tucked the scroll under one arm. You're good, Belle, but you're not the only one looking for it. Her heart skipped once. Who else? But he was already walking away, weaving through the crowd like a man without a care in the world. Catherine didn't linger. She slipped into the hallway, past the crystal sconces and pressed uniforms, out through a side door into a courtyard heavy with the scent of camellias and engine oil. The moment she rounded the corner, she yanked her satchel open and pulled out her notebook. She hadn't gotten the scroll, but she'd seen enough of the image to sketch what she remembered. The jagged coastline, the storm clouds, and most importantly, the small red character at the base. A place name, maybe a date. 6 minutes, she whispered to herself. That's all she had seen it. She crouched against the wall by the light of the paper lantern and began sketching furiously. The soft scratch of pencil on paper, the only sound in the misty courtyard. Her mind moved faster than her hand. Coastlines, dynastic script, the faint smell of smoke still clinging to the scroll's edge. A river port? A mountain pass? Something about the scale had been off. It wasn't decorative. It was directional. She paused, studied her work, and bit the edge of her thumb. If she was right, she'd just seen a fabric of the same map her father had died chasing. and he had the rest of it. She stood quickly, slipping her notebook back into her satchel. A moment's hesitation, then she re-entered the building. The auction had ended. The crowd was thinning now, men shaking hands, women gathering furs and cigarette cases. Somewhere behind the mirrored walls, a gramophone still played a slow jazz waltz. And near the bar, with one elbow casually resting against polished mahogany, was Dane. He didn't see her approach. Catherine reached out and grabbed his arm. He turned, unbothered. "Changed your mind about the drink?" "I'm not interested in whatever game you're playing." He gave her that maddening half-smile. "Oh, but you came all the way back in here just to tell me that." "Who else?" she snapped. His smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes cooled. "That's a long list." "I don't have time for riddles." "No," he said, pulling a match from his pocket. "But you've got time to follow men you don't trust. That's interesting." She held his gaze. "I don't trust you, but I trust you know more than you're saying." He didn't deny it. Instead, he picked up a glass from the bar, untouched, and swirled the amber liquid as if trying to decide whether it was worth the trouble. "You don't want to play games, Belle?" he said. Voice low now. "Then stop pretending you're not already in one." She said nothing. He set the glass down without drinking. "You want the scroll? You want answers. So do a lot of people. The difference is, they're willing to kill for them." "Are you?" His smile thinned. "Only if I have to." She didn't blink. "You're not helping." "Not yet." He gave her one last look, something unreadable flickering beneath the cool exterior, then stepped back from the bar. "If you're smart," he added, "you'll be on the next boat back home." And with that, he vanished into the thinning crowd, leaving Catherine alone with a cold drink and a page full of questions. Chapter 3. Murder in the Garden. British Consulate Grounds, Shanghai, later that night. The gardens behind the British Consulate were unnervingly quiet, too quiet for a city that never seemed to sleep. Gas lamps lined the stone path in an amber haze, casting long shadows over sculpted hedges and rain-dampened roses. The fountains had been drained for winter, and a thin mist rolled low over the tiled walkways, swirling around Catherine's ankles like smoke. She pulled her coat tighter as she passed beneath an arched trellis. The gate clanged shut behind her, the sound echoing faintly in the still air. One hand rested on the flap of her satchel, where the edge of her father's journal pressed reassuringly against her side. Lee was supposed to meet her here, under the arbor, just before the central reflecting pool. She was early. She always was. A bench waited in the alcove, flanked by a pair of stone lions. She didn't sit, too exposed. Instead, she scanned the shadows and listened, to the rustle of leaves, to distant engines, to the soft trickle of a broken fountain. Then she heard it, a footfall, soft, deliberate. She turned sharply. A man stepped into view, medium height, gray suit, round spectacles glinting in the lamplight. Medium height, gray suit, round spectacles glinting in the lamplight. He looked older than she expected, but something in his eyes was sharp, wide awake. "Miss Belle," he said in precise English. She nodded once. "Mr. Lee." He offered no handshake. Instead, he reached into his coat and removed a flat silk pouch, embroidered with a red dragon. "My friend Thomas," he said, "was a rare man. Too brave for his own safety." Her throat tightened. "You knew him well?" "Well enough to recognize that he wasn't killed by fever, as your government claimed." She drew in a breath, steadying herself. "Then you know why I'm here." He nodded and held out the pouch. She took it carefully, opening the flap to find a folded square of paper, aging, delicate. On it, a series of inked characters, numbers, and what looked like a rough coastline. Not a map, but something close. A code, perhaps. Her mind spun. "This symbol," she whispered, pointing to a circular mark near the edge. "It matches the one on the scroll from the auction tonight. That's not coincidence." "No," Lee said, his voice quieter now. "It is warning." "Of what?" But before he could answer, something changed. A movement, a flicker. Lee's head snapped toward the trees. Then came the sound. Soft, almost a cough. The impact hit Lee squarely in the back. His breath left him in a rush as he stumbled forward, collapsing into her. A gunshot. Silenced. Catherine dropped to her knees with him, arms catching his fall. Her voice caught in her throat. Blood spilled across his shirt like ink across paper. "No, no," she whispered. But Lee was gone. Another footfall behind her. She turned just in time to see a shadowed figure raise a pistol from the hedgerow, face obscured by a dark cap. Then suddenly, a rush of movement, a blur of motion from the left. Someone crashed into the attacker with a grunt and a thud. The pistol clattered across the stones as the two men hit the ground in a heap. "Get down!" a voice shouted. Dane. Catherine ducked behind the stone bench, heart pounding. Fists slammed into flesh. The attacker tried to scramble away, but Dane was on top of him, striking hard and fast. The silenced pistol was kicked under a hedge. Finally, Dane pulled the man up by the collar and slammed him into the lion statue. "Who sent you?" he barked. The man spat blood and something in Mandarin. Dane's eyes narrowed. "You've got 3 seconds before I stop asking politely." The man answered with a headbutt that caught Dane square in the jaw. He stumbled back, but just for a second. Then his fist snapped forward, landing squarely in the man's gut. The attacker dropped. Sirens began to wail somewhere in the distance, closer than Catherine liked. Dane looked at her. "We need to go. Now." She hesitated, still crouched over Lee's body. "Catherine," Dane said, more urgently now. "We have to go." He grabbed her hand, pulling her behind the hedge. They crouched low and ran, weaving through the shadows, as the sound of approaching guards drew closer. At the edge of the garden, Dane produced a small silver key and unlocked a maintenance gate she hadn't even noticed. They slipped into the alley beyond, the clang of the gate shutting behind them like a sealed confession. They didn't stop moving until they were deep into the next alley, the consulate lights fading behind them. Catherine pressed herself against a cold brick wall, heart hammering, breath shallow, the silk pouch slick in her grip. Blood had soaked through the corner. Dane stood nearby, jaw tight, scanning both ends of the narrow street. His silhouette looked composed, but his temple was bleeding, and his shirt clung damp against his side. She broke the silence first. "You were right." He turned slightly, just enough to see her. "Sometimes." Her voice dropped. "He didn't even hesitate. 1 shot." Dane nodded. "Professional." "He never even saw it coming." "No," he said quietly. "That's the idea." Catherine exhaled slowly. "So what now?" "Now?" He looked her over, her torn coat, her shaking fingers. "Now you leave. You get on a boat or a train, and you forget all of this. Go back to Boston or Cairo or wherever you came from." She didn't answer. "I'm serious," he said. "You're not built for this." Her eyes flicked to his, sharp again. "You don't know what I'm built for." He almost smiled. "No, but I know what kills people like Lee and your father." Something flickered behind her eyes. She looked down at the pouch, stained and crumpled in her hand. "If I leave now, then it was for nothing. His warning, my father's work, all of it." "You think you'll find answers?" She met his gaze. "I think I have to try." A long silence stretched between them. Then she said, "There's a train tomorrow, south. I have a name, a place. It's the next piece." He gave a small nod, unreadable. Then you'll need someone who speaks the dialect and knows how to disappear. You volunteering? Let's call it a short-term arrangement. She hesitated, then reached into her satchel and pulled out the folded map. She held it between them. Don't make me regret this. He took it without touching her hand. You already do. She shook her head, almost smiled, and turned away. As she stepped back onto the street, she said over her shoulder, Don't be late. Dane smiled to himself, but didn't answer. Chapter 4. Train out of the city. Shanghai Rail Station, early morning. The steam curled thick and bitter around the station's roof beams as Catherine stepped onto the platform, her breath fogging in the chill morning air. She clutched her coat tighter with one hand, the other wrapped around the silk pouch beneath her layers like it was a living thing. A porter's whistle shrilled, followed by the hiss of air brakes and the low, steady chuff of the waiting engine. The 710 to Hangzhou loomed ahead, its steel compartments already half filled with travelers, merchants, officials, families pretending not to notice the armed soldiers posted at the station gates. She moved quickly through the fog, head down, scanning faces. He was late, or gone. She boarded anyway. Inside, the narrow corridor smelled of coal and rose perfume. She slipped into the private compartment she'd booked the night before, dropped her satchel onto the upholstered bench, and sat stiffly beside it. 3 minutes passed. Then the door opened. Still don't trust me, I see, Dane said, sliding in and latching the door behind him. She didn't look up. You're late. Fashionably, he said, removing his coat and tossing it across the opposite seat. You could have left without me. I considered it. He settled in, stretching his legs like they were just two travelers on holiday. Well, I'm touched you waited. She finally looked at him. His jaw was still bruised from the fight in the garden, and his shirt bore the faint crease of a hastily washed bloodstain. Somehow he still looked unbothered. He always did. The train jolted forward. Catherine opened her satchel and withdrew her notebook, placing the code from Lee beside it. As the countryside slowly rolled past the frosted window, she worked quietly, comparing symbols, matching brushstrokes, cross-referencing her father's journal. Dane watched her for a long while without speaking. Finally, You're not like the others. What others? Treasure hunters, spies, professors with egos bigger than their grants. You've got the brains for it, sure, but it's not academic with you. She didn't answer. You're here for him, he added. Your father. She looked up sharply. He held her gaze, steady. I worked with men like him. Too brave, too curious. Most of them didn't live long. She closed the notebook. Why are you here, Dane? He leaned back. Because I like puzzles. No, she said. You were at the tea house, at the auction, in the garden. That's not a puzzle. That's a pattern. He smiled faintly. Maybe I just like your company. I'm serious. So am I. She stared at him, unsure whether to slap him again or believe him, then stopped. Something outside the window caught her eye. A figure on the embankment. Dark coat, too still. Catherine stood and crossed to the door. Dane moved faster. He yanked her back an instant before the explosion. The blast tore through the engine car with a deafening roar. Glass shattering, metal screeching. The floor pitched violently. Suitcases tumbled, screams erupted. Smoke and flame burst from the forward cars. They hit the floor as the train jolted hard to one side, groaning like a wounded animal. The compartment door tore off its hinges and slammed into the opposite wall. Catherine coughed, blinking through the haze. What the hell? Dane pulled her to her feet. We gotta move. The hallway was chaos. People shouted. A conductor stumbled past them with a bleeding arm, yelling in Mandarin. Dane led her through the corridors as fire bloomed up ahead. "Who would sabotage a civilian train?" she shouted over the noise. "Someone who knows you're not a civilian." He reached a rear door and threw it open. Wind and smoke poured in. "Jump?" she asked, incredulous. "It's that or burn." The rail line was elevated, a stone embankment rising above a muddy ravine. Not a drop, a fall. Catherine looked back, flames now racing toward the passenger cars, screams growing louder. "Dane!" He grabbed her hand and jumped. They hit hard, tumbling into a patch of thick undergrowth that broke their fall, but not their breath. She rolled once, twice, landed face down in cold mud and dead grass. Dane landed beside her with a grunt, then cursed under his breath and hauled himself upright. "You all right?" She sat up, dazed. "You're insane." "I warned you." Above them, the train burned in fractured pieces, red flames climbing toward the morning sky. She looked at the wreckage, then at him. "You think they were targeting me?" "Yes." Sirens echoed in the distance, again. Dane offered her a hand. This time she took it. Together, they vanished into the trees. A coded map, a bullet in the dark, and now, a train in flames. Whatever Catherine Bell thought she was chasing, it's no longer just history. With the past closing in behind and nothing but wilderness ahead, she's forced to trust a man she barely knows and walk deeper into a secret that men are willing to kill for. Join us next Thursday for part 2 of Beneath the Jade Sea.